so I'm going to start. This presentation is called Navigating Uncertainty for Students with ASD, which is the Autism Spectrum Disorder. I will be your host today, and thank you all for joining. I have the slide deck for my PowerPoint, as well as some other things that I hope you will find helpful in the link that is in the chat. So please feel free to access those. The objectives today are to provide some brief information about ASD and learn some of the challenges that students face with the autism spectrum disorder. Then we will move into strategies to help the students help students feel at ease, and strategies for navigating the unknown. Our agenda today we'll start with our introductions, move on to some foundational knowledge, and I'm going to talk a little bit about environmental control and use of systems within a classroom. And last, I will talk about controlling chaos. And that's mainly what I mean there is controlling the unknown. Between 3:10 and 3:20, I will have a break. I'll stop at 3:10. The break is about 5 minutes. And then at about 3:15, I will start a video clip that is kind of entertainment purposes, a little information, but I do like sharing a clip in my video or in my presentations, and yet there wasn't really enough time. So if you need a full 10-minute break, take it. If not, come back to see the video clip. So today we will be participating in some interactive conversations via the chat. And how we will do that will be two ways. One will be a waterfall and one will be a river. So the river is slow moving, type it in as you want. When I ask you for a waterfall, what I want you to do is hold your thought until I say, okay, press return, at which point our chat will flow we'll have a rush of things like a waterfall. The reason I do this is because I do a lot of professional development, like I like to learn. And what I found is when we do the river, I sit there and wait and see what other people are typing, not because I'm trying to borrow their answers, but because I want affirmation that I'm not about to type in something really stupid, because, you know, I do that at times. Anyway, I want to see what you have to think, if that makes sense, because your thoughts are valid. So today we're going to start with an easy one. It's a river of who am I and who are you? And go ahead and start talking or start typing who you are. For me, I started my journey through autism before Rain Man came out. And this was due to a cousin of mine who was my first cousin, and he is 6 months older than I am. And me and my sister spent a lot of time with him. And all I remember is growing up, we got told that Jimmy got things, that he would take toys from us because he was autistic. And it was kind of hard as a child because we weren't given much other explanation, but I was okay with that. The other thing is, despite the American Disabilities Act coming into play, he was not educated by public schools, and he was barely educated by private schools because it did not come into play like a waterfall. It sort of trickled in like a river, and people were not equipped to deal with some special needs. And so it wasn't until the mid-'80s, at which point he was in high school, that he was really fully accepted into an educational program. This then, I jump ahead to when I had my son at about 18 months, my doctor told me that, you know, some of the behaviors we were looking at led him to believe that it was autism. And I'm like, no, it's not, because I know what autism looks like. I thought I was the expert. And that's when I found out the saying, if you've seen one person with autism, you've seen one person with autism. And it is so true. When I found this out about my son, I started learning everything I could. I had an undergrad degree in psychology. I continued getting my education and working with my son. At about 2 years, I was told my son would probably never be potty trained. So really keep an eye on his bathroom schedules. And I worked with my son very diligently. My son graduated from Evergreen State College with a degree in computer science. He now works for one of our programs at the Capital Region ESD. He still has quirks. I could go into great detail, but the early intervention really worked. And a lot of it was my own doing, but we also had a very supportive school district. He was in the Olympia School District, and they worked with a lot of challenges with him. I then went and got my BCBA, which is a lot of studying and a really hard test. So what exactly is autism, and how prevalent is it in our society? In 2020, the CDC reported 1 in 54 children are being diagnosed. And girls are less likely than boys at a rate of 4 times. Most children were diagnosed after 4, but it can be diagnosed as young as 2. Autism affects all ethnic and socioeconomic groups. Minority groups tend to be diagnosed later, and early intervention is the best opportunity. So when we're talking about the later diagnosis, that isn't really helpful for students that are getting a late diagnosis. And there is no medical detection. It isn't a blood test. You have got to go through a rigorous testing protocol with your children if you want this to be done. I think it was 2013, the DSM-5 came out. And what this did was it reclassified autism, Asperger's, pervasive development disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, and Rett syndrome. And they all are now in the autism spectrum disorder. They're brain-based developmental disorders that cause social challenges, communicative challenges, and behavioral abnormalities. I can't say that I really like those words, but that is what the DSM-5 classifies the autism spectrum disorder. So what is meant by a spectrum disorder? There's a very broad variety of combinations. They are an underlying degree of severity. 2 children with diagnosis are very different. As I said, you met one child with autism, you've met one child, and that's one adult, one person. And the intellectual abilities can vary. And I went looking for some actual statistics on this, and it was really hard to find because some kids are way up there in IQ levels and some are way low. So I don't know. The best number I found was 30% are under average intelligence. So that's 70% who fall into the normal range. And I didn't see any empirical evidence. If anyone has any, feel free to share it. I'm just saying that when I went down that rabbit hole to find information, there was not a lot. It just said that their intellectual abilities can vary. So some of the common challenges are language delays, difficulty with back and forth conversation, abnormally obsessive interest. And I've seen this happen to where a kid is very hyper-focused on one thing, and the word abnormally, it doesn't mean they're abnormal interests, but I can tell you from personal experience, quite often they do not fit in the general norm of what peers like, which can be problematic. I met a student that I worked with in kindergarten who loved washing machines. The first words out of his mouth when I met him was, "Do you have a top loader?" I didn't even know what he was talking about. And that makes it hard for social communication because there are not a lot of kindergartners talking about their top loaders. Anyway, this doesn't mean that we can't find ways for them to interact. The rigid adherence to routines, very, very profound. Stereotypical motor movements, these often are called stemming. This can be pacing, this can be snapping, clapping. There's a lot of things that are stereotypical or stereotyped movements that a lot of students on the spectrum, a lot of people on the spectrum have. Difficulty using eye gaze gestures, etc. One of the things that I'm going to share with you is most of the stuff that I have learned about autism is firsthand. It is from students. I've worked with some very, very high functioning students who have been able to tell me things that is much more than I could ever learn by reading in a book. And there was a child who told me it hurt to look parents or to look people in the eyes. And I'm like, oh, well, I mean, that is important to know because to them it was a physical pain. And I'm like, well, we need to be aware of that. They can have very few friendships and it's hard to collaborate with peers. Very often they are targets for bullies. I've seen it. I'm not going to bring up the sad stories because there's a lot of them, but keep an eye on students that might possibly target them. There is difficulty sharing enjoyment and interest with others and a hard time relating to others, especially when it comes to getting another person's perspective, and the feeling of empathy is not something that comes natural. And many times they don't understand it. It's not a concept you can explain. It's very challenging for them to write and express thoughts. I often tell teachers to not hand a student on the spectrum a blank piece of paper. It's scary to them. Do some sort of scaffolding or have a prototype ready of what you want them to do. They don't know when or what to contribute, and they have trouble understanding the social rules. They can be taught, though. I'm going to tell you that. It does happen. And quite often, at best, they might not understand them, but they know them. Some of the related issues, I'm not going to read these. I'm going to move to the next slide. Let's just say they have a lot, but I love this next diagram that I came across at one point. And it shows, it's sort of an expanded Venn diagram. And quite often, a person with ASD has a lot of things. Some of the highest kids that I work with, or the majority of kids I work with, we see a lot of anxiety. And yet I see a lot of gifted kids and very, very talented students that have abilities way beyond my comprehension. The OCD and ODD are very prevalent, but the thing to keep in mind is all of these things can be occurring in your students with ASD. Some of them, the higher functioning they are, I've worked with students that I see a lot of depression, and it's because the depression that I'm talking about is because they know where they're at. and they know their challenges, and it's kind of hard for them to accept. It doesn't happen in everybody, but these are hard things for kids because it's not usually just autism that is affecting them. Strengths, and these are amazing. We're talking about some of the best visual learners ever. You show them a prototype of what you want done, and just they've got that. The concrete skills, when they know something, they know something. This can sometimes, it's a strength, can sometimes be a problem, because if they figure something out, they don't want to do 10 problems to show you they figured it out. They've got it. That's it. And so it's really important to recognize when you are tasking them with something that they have already showed you they can do. Memory. There was a kid that I worked with in 3rd grade, and she would remember like what pets different subs had, and would be like, oh yeah, I remember you have a German Shepherd dog named Lucy. And the sub would be like, first of all, why are you stalking me? And then, how did you remember that? And it's just interesting because, just really keen memory. They seem to not forget anything, even things you would like them to forget. The consistency and following rules, very good at it. Sometimes it's hard to get them to break the rules. It's hard to get them to unlearn something that you have taught them. And so you have to be very mindful. I was teaching a student one time about not climbing under the desk, because that's what they were doing to escape tasks. And swear to God, about a week later, they had an earthquake drill, and I could not get this kid under the desk for the life of me. So keep in mind that rule-governed behavior. If you teach them something, you better have a codicil for if there is a way that they are ever going to need the skill you are teaching them to do the opposite. And very, very meticulous about attention to detail. One thing that autism spectrum disorder is not is it is not a choice. This just happened. It is not a result of poor parenting. It's not a behavior disorder, and it is not something that can be fixed by the child wanting to do more. It is I'm sorry, I made an error in here. It is invisible. It's not visible. I'm going to correct that. It is invisible. It is a hidden disability. And I'll bring you up an example. My son, I would be out in public, and I can't tell you how many times other people would correct me for my parenting, or talk to him about things he should be doing. And they would not do the same thing if he showed his disability. But the students on the spectrum, it's not very obvious. And again, that visible, it's not visible. It is hidden. Do not assume that the child laying in the middle of Target in a snowman making position is doing this because they're a naughty kid. This has nothing to do with parenting or anything. This is, and in all honesty, you shouldn't assume anything like that anyway. But a lot of times people do not jump to conclusions. It is not impossible to address in general education. If you kind of think back to what I just said about how many kids are below average intelligence, that does not mesh up with how many are in special ed settings. So this can be addressed in the general ed situation. And it is not something that needs to be in self-contained rooms. It is probably better if we have those peer role models. It is not something that is well understood by the public. And in fact, most people think of it in terms of movie autism or TV autism. And again, it is something that is so different. I see some people piping in, and I definitely feel for you if you've been in situations like that with either your parents or your own children or other kids. It's a tough one. It really is. And yet, you know, we persevere, we get through, but and we love these kids. I mean, they're wonderful. They're great additions to our society, but society is not always as kind as they should be to students on the spectrum. Okay. My next one, we are going to move into what's different about our world. And I brought out a crystal ball, and we're going to waterfall this one, which means as I'm talking, think about what you think next school year will look like. Mainly focusing on the changes. What's going to be different? What's going to be COVID similar? What's going to be, you know, what do you think it's going to look like? Are we going to be in hybrid mode? Are we going to be shut down? Are we going to be like we were 2 years ago? What is September going to look like? And since I think I've talked enough, we're looking at kind of a waterfall. So on the count of 3, I want to type in your prediction of what the next school year is going to look like. So 1, 2, 3. Enter. Oh, okay, masks full-time, mask increase. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but increased of student stress. That's not funny, I'm sorry. But yeah, so we have a lot of prediction, more of the same, closures, and just a ton of different things that we think are gonna happen. But the reality is, we don't know. I was going through this this prediction thing. I mean, I'm like, what do we think school would look like? Well, masks, full-time, 24/7, not 24/7, 5 days a week, full-time. Social distancing was going to still be in place, all the way down to unmasking, teachers unmasked, kids masked. So no matter how we look at it, we don't know. And more of the same was one of the answers. But you know what? The same was uncertain. So more uncertainty, you know, and that's really what it is. None of us know. So we're dealing with a group of students who embrace the sameness. You know, there's somebody that talked about vaccines, and they do not predict there will be a vaccine for kids under 12 anytime within the next 6 months. So that will impact your lower grades definitely. But how do we deal with kids that they love you the same, they love the sameness. This is what they thrive on, and yet we all know we have no idea what it's going to be like. Thus, uncertainty. So I got this one out because I wanted to talk about control. And we know we cannot control what is going to happen. We have no control over it, and we have very little control over anything that has happened already. But we can ride the waves. And to ride the waves, we need to be prepared for that. So we are going to look at ways to be prepared for this. In the past year, I've dealt with a lot of students. Some have gone back to school. Some have had distant learning. Nothing has been really the same. The hardest for me was a student on the spectrum who was having a real hard time with distant learning because they believed that they caused this to happen because their very last day before schools were shut down, they were not behaving right and were sent home from school. And so they thought the whole closure was their fault. And I'm sorry that I laugh because this kid was 8 years old and I felt terrible because if they could go back and make schools come back in and, no convincing this kid that no, you had nothing to do with it wasn't working. So we need to keep in mind, how are we going to be prepared for our waves that are coming? So one thing to keep in mind, and I tell everybody I work with, these are questions that students on the spectrum like answered. They like to know the answers to them, and they like the feeling of the control that will give them. So when we are planning for the next year, what do? And what we are going to do is answer, where are they going? What will they do there? How much will they do? What will finished look like? And what will come next? Now, we're not going to be able to answer all of these. So we're going to have to come up with some plans that will work to satisfy the kids that are having trouble with the changes that will be bound to happen. So the first thing we're going to look at is the environmental control. And we want our settings to be as accessible to a student on the spectrum so that they feel that this is an inviting environment. And these are the areas I'm going to address. And I'm not going to talk as much as I've got some examples of what they will look like. But floor space, ceiling and lighting, storage areas, windows, desks and tables. And then we're going to talk about how do we do this with COVID changes in mind. How do we deal with our floor space? This is a post-COVID picture. These kids are all spaced 6 feet apart, and there are arrows for how they're to walk in their classroom. They don't quite know, or they're familiar with it. We've got arrows. We've got ways to do it. We don't know if 6 feet is still going to be in play because I heard 3 feet. We don't know about a lot of things here, but this is a good example. If you can set up your classroom to look, 3 feet, yes, this way as well, this will be a good setup for you to have. However, the recommendations are, or I don't even know if some of them are recommendations, but whatever the mandates are, follow them, but make sure that it makes sense. When you walk into a room, that it makes sense, and walk it out too. When we first started going through the changes, all of these grocery stores had these arrows. And pretty soon people stopped using them because it didn't make sense. If you wanted something on a very end of an aisle, you either had to walk down a complete aisle, but basically people started ignoring those arrows really quickly at the grocery store because it didn't make sense to follow them. the way people grocery shop is not the same for everybody. So when you do something in a floor space arrangement, make sure that you can walk it. We are at 3 o'clock, so I'm going to set us up for a 5-minute break, and at 3:05, I'll start a video. At 3:10, I will get back to the presentation. And Sierra, I'm going to send you some stuff on, I've worked with a lot of preschools. So if you can get me your email and just send it to mine, I've got a lot of stuff that will help you with socially distancing and things. Oh, there you go. So when I'm done with this, either today or tomorrow morning, I'm going to get you some stuff, because I did work with some preschool classrooms, because it is a challenge. So I will get those to you. And I will see everybody back here, well, in 10 minutes, but we'll start a video at 3:05. Thank you so much.
To the elderly?
Excuse me?
Yeah, but not your books. Something they might enjoy.
I'm leaving.
You can't leave. I need you.
You do?
Yes. You're my ride.
Sheldon, look, I am scared and in a lot of pain. Could you please take a break from being you for just a minute and try being, I don't know, comforting?
I'm sorry. There. Everything's going to be fine. Sheldon's here.
Thanks, it's much better.
Here.
Look, Sheldon's hugging me.
What about trains do you like so much?
An interesting question. When I was a child, life was confusing and chaotic for me, and trains represented order. I could line them up, categorize them, control them. I guess you could say that they gave me a sense of calm in a world that didn't.
It's lovely, Sheldon.
Sheldon?
Yes?
Listen, they're kind of getting busy in the living room, and I was wondering if I could hang out in here for a while.
Well, I suppose. Come in. I'll sleep in Leonard's room. Good night.
You know, you fanboys are unbelievable. Do you think you can just ring my doorbell anytime you want? I mean, why don't you just come on in and watch the Lakers game with me?
Well, I'm not much of a sports fan, but thank you.
You came into my apartment last night while I was sleeping?
But only to clean. Really more to organize. You're not actually dirty, per se.
Give me back my key.
I'm very, very sorry.
Do you understand how creepy this is?
Oh, yes, we discussed it at length last night.
In my apartment while I was sleeping.
And snoring. And that's probably just a sinus infection. But it could be sleep apnea. You might want to see an otolaryngologist. The throat doctor.
And what kind of doctor removes shoes from asses?
Depending on the depth, that's either a proctologist or a general surgeon.
Okay, welcome back. I'm sorry the sound wasn't working in the beginning of that video. I didn't realize I had to unmute myself. And so anyway, I did fix it. If you missed the beginning of it, The Big Bang Theory is great if you're wanting to watch good episodes with Sheldon doing spectrum-like things. So that's why I use a lot of Big Bang Theory in my clips on when I do my autism presentations. The next area that I'm going to talk about, controlling in your classroom. And remember, these are all strategies to create a sense that you want the child to come into your room. You want it to be a place that works for them, that is an environment that they're going to want to be a part of. So the ceiling and lighting, it is a good place to put students' work. It is also a good place for organization. You can hang up signs of what table you want a person to be or where you want the dismissal line to be. So there's a lot of organizational things that you can hang above kids' heads. These are very good tools because of the fact that they are less likely to be distracting so long as they're high enough and not too many of them. They can also be for decoration. These are some examples that I found that are acceptable. You still need some blank spaces in there, but you know, these all add to what I would call an inviting classroom. When we're talking about lighting, I'm going to show you the picture of light coming through and seeing dust particles. And again, I shared with you early on that my best information I have grabbed from people. And I had a student one time tell me that they always saw dust particles in the classroom. And it was only when the lighting was low enough that they didn't see it, or they could look in certain directions. But we've all seen this. We don't see it at all times. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about it. What we can do, though, to alleviate that for students that might have problems, is we can cover our lights with these. They tend to block out things that would be disruptive. I don't know if I talked about it in this session because I'm running back to back, but I do not recommend covering every light because there's a thing that I use a lot called tolerance training. And if you set up your classroom to eliminate all things that may be challenging, then you are not setting a kid up for reality. So if you're going to do something to cover the lights, to perhaps dim out some of the glare that it might be, don't do them all. Maybe do a portion of your room, maybe do a corner of it, but make sure that you allow that into the room and work on some tolerance training. And that is where you'd be like, okay, can you maybe stand over here for 10 minutes, something along that line, but something where we're talking about not totally making it conducive to what you think would be environmentally encouraging for them to come in, because it's not preparing them for the real world. Now, if you have a kid that totally can't stand it at all, okay, start with them, but then start uncovering some of the lights. Do it that way. But we don't want to make it too challenging or too inviting that they're not going to be set up for real life situations. So our storage spaces, they should be well labeled, because a lot of our students on the spectrum do things like open cabinets a lot and open drawers a lot. And the one thing that I have found is it's not like they're looking for anything, it's that unknown. So if you have things that you store away, And if you have things that you don't want them to touch, if you can lock them, great. Maybe put what's in there and why you don't want them to touch. Cleaning supplies with a little arrow or a little do not touch. But that unknown just drives a lot of students on the spectrum crazy. So when you see someone opening and shutting cabinets, it can be easily fixed if they know what's behind there. Setting up a desk, and this can vary for each student. This is a pretty low functioning kid that needs picture representation of how things are, but it goes through a kid's day, and this could be very helpful for somebody who might not be able to function without kind of watching their day go by. So if you do want to set something like that up, that's great. If the student doesn't want it, do not put it up there because it will be of no use. If they want it something that they can tuck away in their desk, great. But if you put something on a kid's desk that they really don't want, they're just going to pick it off. I mean, they can't be taped down that secure. And so, I mean, yes, there are some haves, but something like this you can probably do without. There are kids that might want their desk completely clear, and that should be acceptable. If you want their name on them, okay, maybe explain why, have a tolerance. Can we have your name on the date that we have subs come in? Something along that line. But this is a nice visual that will help make them want to be in your classroom. So some of the COVID challenges that we may see are going to possibly be, are we going to look at plexiglass? Are there going to be teachers teaching behind plexiglass? What else is there going to be in place? I know we had a ton of them when we were looking into our magic ball. So the idea with what COVID challenges are, and we'll get to that a little later in the presentation, is be thinking of them, be thinking of how we're going to address them, what we're going to do with them, and are they realistic? I was at a classroom that put up plexiglass for every student. Pretty soon those students were so preoccupied knocking them over. They then put up stronger supports. So they were knocking over stronger supports. They were accidentally knocking them over. They were, breathing on them to see the little fog up effect. And so if you think you have an answer for things, try them out. And that's my main type of thing to talk about when we're looking at them. This was a classroom that I actually went into that, in this case, they were working quite well, but they turned to be more of a problem than they helped anything. The wall space and decor is very crucial because we communicate a lot through our walls, and yet sometimes they can be quite overwhelming for students on the spectrum. So we want them to be simple yet functionable. We want some classroom representation, but I will caution you before putting anything on a wall from a student, ask their permission. And this is from all students. If you want to tell them ahead of time, these are going up on our wall, that's one thing. And, maybe they still don't want it, but make sure that it's with permission. You want to have some displays change and let your students know which ones those are, but some remain permanent. This sort of fills the stability that our students on the spectrum might seek out. And a schedule that makes sense to the students should always be visible. And when I say make sense, I mean a couple of things. It needs to be something that they can understand. I cannot tell you the amount of times I have gone into a preschool or kindergarten class that has not only words that they probably can't read, but also picture representation of analog clocks that they certainly cannot read. So make sure that they understand what the schedule is. If you have a way of navigating through it with a little arrow or something, that will help. These are all things environmentally that we can control with very few changes throughout a school year. Our systems are going to be changing quite often. The arriving, we started out arriving with going through this door, getting our temperature taken. Some schools were having kids getting their temperature taken before they entered on a bus. But the key thing to note is that students should know ahead of time what is going to be happening when they get off the bus. Now, if this changes right before they arrive, make sure somebody is there that is trusted to help them and provide visual supports. Because as we said in the beginning, our students are on the spectrum are more visual. So if they appear all flustered right off the bat, being able to give them that visual representation of what it's going to look like today would be great. Now, also be prepared for what happens when. And what I mean by this is if they arrive, they get their temperature taken and they have a temperature, what is going to happen next? This needs to be taught to the students ahead of time because they need to be aware of what the next steps are. We don't want them to be showing up with a fever. We hope that they don't, but it does happen. And there is usually a protocol in place that needs to be taught prior to school starting. There are ways that we turn in our schoolwork and make sure that that is pretty steadily taught, pretty simple, but we need to be aware of it. These are kind of more COVID things. Going to the restroom. What is going to be different this year? Is it going to be stable? Is it going to change by day? Are we going to allow more than one kid in the restroom? Are we going to make it, that they have to have a pass? What is your school going to do? And make sure that that is taught. And when changes do occur, if they occur, be sure to make sure that the students know. If you have somebody having a particular difficult time with this, see if you can't get a special system in place, such as, you know what? I want you to go to the nurse's office to use the restroom because it's going to be the best choice for you because we can guarantee that's going to happen all year. You may have to wait. You may have to wait until the nurse's office is open to use it, but you can talk to Miss So-and-so while you wait. Whatever it is, that is something that was not constant this year. It varied from school to school, and it was very complicated for kids who didn't know what to do when they arrived out to go to the bathroom and there was somebody there. And they were told they weren't supposed to go in, but sometimes we're not told what they then were supposed to do. So make sure that you kind of track it through everything that could possibly happen within reason. Getting materials. We, in the past, have used a lot of shared materials. That did not happen very often this year. Everybody had their own materials. Are you going to be able to store them all at the kid's desk or table or whatever? I don't know what your system is going to be, but make sure they know ahead of time. I skipped over lining up, not because I meant to, but I just did. So going back to lining up, this is very crucial for kids on the spectrum, and it trips kids up all the time. And everybody thinks that it is because the kid with autism or the kid with on the spectrum wants to be first. And I've tried to process this through my own working with kids, and I don't think it's that they want to be first. I think it is that visual learning. And when you visually imagine a line, you really can only visualize the front of it. And with one particular kid that I worked with, while trying to get him not to be obsessing over being first, I started telling him to line up third. And again, I told you earlier about, testing things before you do it. And it is very irritating having a kid screaming, "I want to be first." It's irritating and somewhat awkward having a kid saying, "I want to be third." So think of how you are going to line up your students in a way that makes sense to them, that they can visually make a line work for them, and make sure that it's pre-taught. Moving through the classroom and through the building, there were many little obstacles I saw teachers taking to get their kids through the hallway. When we started this, there were airplane arms being taught so they would be far enough apart. I saw zombie arms. I saw a lot of different things to social distance in a line. And however you need to do it to maneuver through your classroom and your school, teach it to the kids. The organization of the desks, again, if they're keeping all of their supplies in their desk, how are they going to keep them organized? As much as students on the spectrum love to be organized, unless you show them how you want them, it may not be that easy for them to actually organize their desks. The dismissal, most of the time it is not as complicated as arrival, except for you might see staggered times for kids waiting for parents to pick them up. But just to make sure your students are aware of these in advance, which can sometimes be problematic if they get a last minute call that mom's picking them up. But just let them know, that you've got this. This will work for them. Some pictures. This is a turn-in basket. It is telling the kids exactly what you want out of them, and sort of a reminder of what things should be done. And you can see in the background, there's some paper clips. In this kid, the kid clipped their work and put it underneath, however you want to do it, but it's a nice visual representation of what the teacher wanted to see. Here is a dismissal routine that when the kids were ready to go, went up on the board. Sorry. They went through everything, and there were some kids that maybe had a little more challenge of getting dismissal down, so they might have had a visual representation, or it might have actually been on their desk at the end of the day. Here is a visual representation of a lineup plan, and it was a good way to show the kids what they wanted. The kids were pretty good at navigating their way through the hallway. It was a wonderful tool for kids to figure out how to walk, and it was used before a transition, so they got this visual and they were prepared to go. It was also practiced. This is an example of what inside of the desk is going to look like, and this would help if you've got a student that would need those kind of supports even inside their desk. Children will not remember you for the material things you provided, but for the feeling you cherished them. I'm going to kind of move into my next portion, which talks about how are we going to prepare these kids for what we don't know. And one of the biggest, most important things that we are going to be able to do in the relationship building or in the school is build those relationships, because the more the kid trusts you, the more they're going to follow along with what your plan is. And that's so important for you to realize as their teacher that this relationship, it may not be as easy to form as with some of your other students, but it is certainly going to be one that will pay off in so many ways, not only because how they're going to act in your classroom, but I have worked with some of the most fascinating children in the world, and what I take away from my job is just amazing, because I've learned so much from them that I can't even explain how wonderful it is to get to know a kid who may be hard to get to know. And I'm not just talking about a student on the spectrum. Sometimes those kids that are the hardest to let you in are the relationships that you remember the most. So more than ever, these kids need us to help them, and they need to have those relationships. And they need it more because they're going to need to trust us a little more as we get through this next year. So this, I want you guys to type in, and this is my river. So type it in when you want. Think about how do you build relationships with your students, and think of maybe some of those students that might be hard, some of those students that may not be as verbal, because these are sometimes your silent students. I did put into the Google Drive a bunch of different templates of get to know me. These were free from Teacher Paid Teacher. If you find something on there that I shouldn't be using, let me know. I try to make sure that anything I share with people, I have done properly, but in the event that I don't, I want to know. I don't want to ever use something or that I shouldn't be. But I gave a handful of different suggestions for people. So just kind of let me know, type in different ways you build relationships, and what do you do that you think is a good way to help build a relationship with a hard to get to know student. Calendar time, asking questions. Be present in mind. I am re-sharing the Google Drive for somebody who asked, but feel free, show them I'm here for their successes and prosperity, getting to know the scholar and family, weekly check-ins, a few minutes each week to get to know them personally. I find out what students are interested. For creative sentences. Monday morning sharing, I love that. Asking questions, following up. Some of the other things are talking about non-school items. I mean, we're here to be in school with them, to teach them, but sometimes learning about what they do outside of school is not bad. They will share plenty of what's going on in their lives. Sharing about yourself. And most kids at this point, if they've worked with me at all, know that I really like cats and pink. Those are the two takeaways everybody has. But incorporating their favorites into interests and interactions are nonverbals. I love that. I mean, it's nice that we can use the nonverbal ways of communicating. One of the things that I shared in the Google Drive is a lanyard of emojis. And one thing that was really, really challenging for students on the spectrum this year was covering our faces. As for years, we have tried to teach students on the spectrum what our smile means, what our scorn means, different things like that. And they don't know naturally what people's facial cues are. And so I noticed this very early on, and I usually wear mine everywhere, and there are a bunch of different emojis. And so I shared my lanyard template with you guys. I had a teacher I worked with that not only made this up for herself, but made it up for all of her students so that they can share, because their masks are covering their faces too. And thank you for liking the lanyard, because it is, when we covered our faces, we did a real disservice, and I get why. I do. I am no way saying this isn't good, but it really did hurt when we were talking about sharing things and using facial cues, because these kids that we work with that do not do a good if someone can walk me through, I have a moderator in there, how to close caption. I don't know how to do that, but if somebody can walk me through how to do it, I would love to. Anyway, but yeah, the clear masks work. There are a lot of different ways of doing that to show your facial expressions. I think it is just very crucial for these kids to be able to understand that behind our faces are not stern looks. We are very much so trying to express things. The other thing we did by covering our faces is that we muffled our voices. And if you recall, I said that we're talking about visual learning or visual learners. So when we took away that and we muffled our voices, it was hard enough for them to understand what we were saying with our muffled voices. So there were a lot of kids that really suffered by the mask wearing. Again, not saying it was a bad thing. I get it. But workarounds are the emojis, asking people to repeat themselves. I mean, those are the only ones that I can really think of, but I definitely recommend it. Maybe writing down things for kids who are able to read. I am trying to figure out how to do the closed captioning, and I don't know how on this Hoppit format. But if anyone can type it in, I will be happy to add that. So one thing that I teach kids prior to even COVID is that we need contingency plans in our life. And our little cute slide that says, if plan A doesn't work, there are 24 more letters. So, that's a lot. And how are we going to plan for things that we don't know? I have always taught kids about contingency plans. I have quite often used the word contingency, even with our very young readers or our very young learners. And I remember this kid I worked with that I talked about contingency, and one day we had tried all of and I let him know what my plans were. And he was like 6. And he looks at me after we'd run out of our contingency plans. And he's like, oh, Miss Karen, what's our next contingency plan? So big words with little kids, they're fine if you explain what they are. And sometimes what comes out of their mouth is just adorable. It's very, very nice to see. I'm glad that you shared that about the clear masks, because that definitely is an option. So now I want to go into things that you think you may need backup plans. And if you could just type in like a river as they come to mind. I'm going to give you the first one. What is your plan if school is closed? How are you going to communicate with your students? And how are they going to know that ahead of time? But right now, I just want you to type it in and type in other things, because we're going to spend a lot of the next couple. I mean, we're going to finish up here quickly, but we want to go through some of these. Schedule a Zoom. Beautiful. Video lessons again. Connect and moving forward. So these are great ideas. We had some scheduling Zoom. School's going to close. Seesaw Zoom. What are you going to do when you send your kids home every day to let them know ahead of time things may be different? Because we may need to turn on a dime. And I suggest from day one, let the kids know that here is what we would do in the event that you are not coming to school the next day. Maybe have something in a take-home folder that explains, if you get the call, here's our plan. So ahead of time, you have prepped kids for the idea that school may not happen. And then everything is going to come easy. Great idea. Prep what if packets. Yeah. Have something just sitting there. Go, hey, you can look at them now. Don't touch them until you get the call. And by then we'll have a plan figured out. But something about that is going to be needed. The seating arrangements. Right now we're at 3 feet. What if we get a call that says, yeah, you need to not be at 3 feet. We need it 4.5, or we don't need it at all. And so seating arrangements, you need to share with the kids that these could change, and that should be anyway. Some of the other things are movement breaks. This was very hard and yet very needed, because many things that we orchestrate throughout a school day serve the purpose of movement breaks. And so it's not that you necessarily need the kids on the carpet to learn something and then go back to the desk. That's a movement break. You might want them there, but we're going to have to be more deliberate in our movement breaks. Mask breaks, very important. What is your plan for a mask break? Where are they going to be? Is it going to be outside? Exercises built in every 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah, definitely important. Washing hands and sanitizing. I was in a school district that right before COVID removed all of the hand sanitizer because they were like, this might be hard on kids' hands. Well, now hand sanitizer, there was a time you couldn't find enough of it, but we need to make sure that our routines for washing our hands are pretty much in place. And if they change, what are they going to look like? Our lunch routines, our recess routines, what are those? If they change, how are we going to let the kids know? The class sizes, hybrid type of options, and virtual learning. These need to be taught to our students before they start learning. So how do you make plans during uncertain times? Now, we've gone through some of them, but I cannot address everybody because you all have different plans. You all have different arrangements, different classrooms, different configurations. So how do you make them? You identify the problem or the concern. Think of all of the possible alternatives. This is where you just are racking your brain going, okay, what could we do if they do that? Somebody wrote in like emergency drills. I'm like, gosh, I don't even know how they did them last year because I was never around when a school did one. But, those old, we all get in a corner for an intruder alert. There's no 6 feet in those, but think of all, identify the problem. What alternatives do you have? Write them down and keep a file, and then be prepared to put them into place when needed. Hopefully you will have time to practice before you have to make it, and communicate with students that you've got a plan, maybe even assign a special job to a kid that might have a hard time during a changing time. Now, building and gaining trust. We kind of talked about this. You might have a lot of kids that might come to you with concerns throughout the year. And I expressed the child that thought they caused COVID. This was nice that the kid was able to share this. And it was hard not to chuckle a little, because in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my God, nobody has that much power, but you can't. I mean, this was a kid who really thought that they were responsible for this. So be sure to address any concerns with seriousness and be happy that they are coming to you. Don't expect them to come naturally. They might not be able to do it on their own. You may need to, prompt them. If you can use examples to a kid of when you've been reliable, do you remember that one time that we had a fire drill and I got you all out in time, and, our principal said how good our class was? Give them examples that they can visualize of when you have been trustworthy, because these are not kids that naturally trust people, not even their parents sometimes. I mean, my son, oh my God, the looks he would give me when I would suggest things. Are you sure this is going to work, Mom? I'm like, yeah, I think so. But these are not kids that are going to naturally trust you because you are their teacher. So make sure that you have the ability to let them know you are worthy of their trust, and give them examples. And if you've got things that some input would be there, see if the class has some ideas. Be honest about what you don't know. This sometimes is hard because we're supposed to know. We've got kids looking up to us. We've got their parents putting their trust in us. And I think all of us have probably said, I don't know, too many times in the past year and a half. But it's okay if you can say, I don't know the answer to that. Let them know you'll try to find out. But the good thing about that honesty is you can then use it to let them know you have their backs. Now, just so you know, sayings like that usually do not work with students on the spectrum. They are going to be like, how do you have my back? It's on my back. But don't say it literally, but let them know, because if you are honest with them and you can prove to them that you're there to take care of them, you're going to be much better off unable to navigate their uncertainty. Because Because you can, because they trust you, because they're there. I have worked with many students that I have been able to be their guidance, and then, said, okay, here's the thing. I'm going to help you with your behavior right now, but you've got to trust me. I'm here for you. Now, was I able to walk in the first day and say that to them? Heck no, wouldn't have worked. But once I got to a point, it was very successful. Now, obviously, herding cats is not that difficult because we see a man holding a bunch of cats, right? I also rarely do a PowerPoint without a cat picture in it at some point. So our next thing is, let me know something that you plan to do, prepare, change for the next year. While you're doing that, I want to play this video that was made by students on the spectrum.
Six, 7, 8, 9. Take my hand. I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
So I have like less than a minute for any questions, but I'm going to tell you, if you've got my email and you want to reach out to me, I am here to help you. I will do whatever I can to get any questions answered. I hope you guys enjoyed today, and I hope you're learning a lot from the summit. It's been a really great program for us to be able to share things with. So thank you so much.